Hey, I'm Rhett Shull. This is my second channel, and this is the long-form interview that I did with Joe Bonamassa for the What Is The Tweed Sound video. Joe was super cool to take time out of his day to talk to me over a Zoom call last week, and we get pretty in-depth into Joe's love for Tweed amps as well as my love for Tweed amps, and he drops some serious knowledge on me and now on you. So huge thanks to Joe for coming out and showing up here on the channel. I'll have links to all his stuff in the description box down below. The man knows a thing or two about how to make a Tweed amp sound right. So we're going to jump straight into the interview, but before we do that, if you haven't seen the original video, I'd highly recommend it. Check it out here. You can also find links in the description box down below to support this channel as well as my main channel, and mark your calendars for November 21st, Saturday at 5 p.m. over on my main YouTube channel. We have Backstage Live Episode 5. That's a full band live stream concert series that we've been putting on this year over there. And that episode is going to be a tribute to Chess Records, which I'm really, really excited about. All right, without further ado, let's get into the interview with Joe. So in your mind, what is the Tweed sound?
I think the Tweed sound really encompasses a few things. To me, when Leo was coming up with his amp designs, you know, everything from 46, K&F and the Woodies and the early dual professionals, and they were going for clean. They were going for high fidelity, clean. And as the parts and his designs got more refined, he achieved that, certainly by the end of the run of the Tweed amps. To me, the Tweed sound is everything from Neil Young and Crazy Horse, where you get a deluxe that's just with a Jensen speaker that's just collapsing and it kind of does a thing, to, you know, like Robbie Robertson, at the Winterland Ballroom, for the last waltz, and what you do see a lot of common denominators in your favorite rock and roll tones, your favorite blues tones, even like there's pictures of B.B. King in the Live at the Regal, era with a dot neck and a stereo cable or, whatever. And he's plugged into a high powered Tweed twin. Why? Because it was loud. But to me, it's a little bit darker. It's more pronounced in the mid range, and they're very articulate if you get the right speaker combination. And speakers make or break the entire amplifier for me. Same thing with Dumbles. You could put an Altec in a Dumble and you're like, whoa, this is real harsh. And then you could put a Celestion in a Dumble and you're like, there's Robin Ford. Same thing with a Tweed twin or deluxe. It's like the Alnico versus ceramic component changes the entire sonic makeup of the amplifier. They're really, really specific on what speakers you use.
So off of that, what are your preferred speakers for a Tweed amp?
Well, it depends. I'm really weird. I like EVs and very, very high-powered speakers for Marshall amps. I don't like what Celestions do, even though many have used them. To me, they sound, with a Marshall, it sounds pretty fizzy and a little bit too bright and a little bit too compressed. And my kryptonite is compression and treble. And conversely, with a Fender amp, especially an early, mid-50s Tweed amp, I like what a ceramic Celestion does. I think it brings out the best in the mid-range. It kind of curtails the amp's, propensity to kind of collapse within itself, and it holds the bottom end tighter. So I like Celestions in amps that I'm using. High-powered Tweed twin. I'll tell you where I got the idea. Pierre gave me a tour of Keith Richards' rig back in 2014, and I'm sitting there, I'm looking at the chocolate-covered SIR amp and then another one, and I'm like, 80-watt Chinese speakers in this thing. I'm like, that sounds like a good idea. And then when I bought one a few months later, it had already had the Celestions in it, and I go, this is the sound. You don't need to go look any further. And same thing with deluxes. My main Tweed Deluxe that I use in the studio has a Rolla 25-watt mid-70s ceramic Celestion. And those, to me, give me the articulation and the flexibility about, because really at that point between 4 and 9, that's your gain. How much gain you want, 4 or 9? I tend to run mine between 9 and 9. You know, I default to 9, and then I use my volume control.
Right. And you're using, you said Chinese Celestions. You're using just the modern off-the-shelf Celestions and stuff, or are you going like finding old UK-made Celestions?
I use right now, because I've retired my old twins off the road. I've been using UK-made Joe Bonamassa 85-watt Celestions, which are modeled after the Chinese 80 watts. And I kept saying, I go, make it sound like the Chinese speaker. I like it, you know? You know, a good, you know, late 70s, early 80s, Rolla 65, Robin Ford kind of speaker that he used. Even just the ones you used to buy for $80, like right off the rack. They're consistent, you know. So to me, when you're looking for a speaker, you don't hear with your eyes. Especially don't fixate on where it's made. Stick it in there. If it's working, it's a win, you know? And I find that, you know, with the way I run the twins, especially in a live sense, I get about 45 shows out of a set of speakers before they don't blow up. They just start losing the articulation in the mid-range, and you can pull them out and you see like the voice coils and the cones are all twisted. Because,
wow.
You know, when you put 80 watts into 212s that loud, it's a violent event. Those things are shaking. And yeah, so I get about 45 shows out of them, and then I have them either reconed or I give them to other cats, and they, you know, maybe they use a higher gain amp and they're not playing as loud, and they're totally fine for the rest of their lives.
Wow, that's awesome, man. So tell me about your first Tweed amp.
My first Tweed amp was, oddly enough, a 1956 Fender Super that my father found in Rome, New York, for the grand total of, drumroll please, $225. All original, and it didn't work. And we weren't amp techs. I've never been an amp tech. You'll never see me with a screwdriver pulling the amp and going, hey, what does this do? You know, I've been shocked too many times. Probably goes to, you know, show you what my personality is like. And I was a kid. I was a teenager. I was like probably 13 years old. And I was like, holy cow, look at this thing. It said Fender Super. It was all beat up. And I did have enough skill set to go, well, let me see if the fuse is blown. And we got it home, and I put a new fuse in it, and it just fired up and worked. So I lucked out. And that was my very first one. And then I remember being on tour with Bloodline in '94. And I'd been saving up my per diem, and we went to a store in Austin, Texas, named One World Guitars, I believe. It was a really nice guy, and it had a super clean, like wide panel 54 Deluxe. It was $700, and I spent all of my money. It was top of the heap in '94, but it was mint. It was clean, and I still have it. And I spent all of my money on that amp, and I have no regrets, because I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. And I carried it around in like a Rubbermaid container so it wouldn't get beat up. And I stuck it in the back of the, we were in a bus at that point. So I stuck it in the bay of the bus, and I got it home in mint condition. I flew with it. It was like my child. And I loved it. I still love it.
Amazing. So thinking back to the early days, what do you think Leo and the people at Fender, what do you think was going through their heads when they were designing these early Tweed amps? Because like you said, they were going for clean, but to me, there's nothing really clean about a Tweed amp. Do you think that they realized at the time what they were creating and the impact that it would have on the music world?
Well, you know, to me, Leo was a genius, and he got it right the first time, most of the times. The Strat comes out in '54. Does the Strat change much other than the difference in the neck and whatever, you know, rosewood maple, but the design of it is pretty much the same. Broadcaster, which turned into the Telecaster, we're still playing those today. You know, his early amps are pretty crude. Like I have in the living room, I have a couple of the very first Princetons. They're pre-Tweed. They're the wooden ones. And there's no volume control. The idea was the volume control was on the steel, and they were selling them as sets. And then, you know, he Leo would start running to guys like, Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys, Eldon Shamlin, and all those guys that were playing that kind of Western swing, in Bakersfield, and they were all asking me like, well, listen, we want it clean. The steel players had extra strings and they wanted it clean. So then you get amps like the Pro, with a 15. And I have a couple of his first professional amps that he made, like 47, 48, which are called the Dual Professionals. And the guitar input or the regular input is pretty mundane, but it would do what it was supposed to do with two 10-watt Jensen speakers. And it would, you put any kind of electric guitar, and it was kind of clean, and it had enough treble to make it sound somewhat hi-fi. It wasn't super hi-fi, but it was hi-fi enough for those days. And then you plug into the microphone input, which he had all intentions of people singing through. And then it's like instant, like Tres Hombres. It's like tons of gain. So by the time he got to the high power twin, he was going for as loud and as clean as possible to service the professional Western swing market. And this kind of, we want it louder, we need it cleaner. And then by the time he switched to like the Showman in like 60 or 61, and got involved with the surf scene, it was those amps, the difference between a high power twin and a white twin, it's like apples and oranges. They have very little to do with each other sonically and appearance. And he achieved what he wanted to. You could turn a white twin up to like 9. Yeah. It's still pretty clean, and it's loud, and it's glassy, and it's like, wow, this is super hi-fi. Turn a high power twin up to 9. It's chewy and fat and distorted.
Right. So when you were a kid, what was the first time you ever became aware of the Tweed sound? Was it a certain record or player you were listening to, or was it your dad showing you the ropes? What was that like?
Well, I think what really set me down the path of Fender amps in general was my friendship with a guy named Danny Gatton. And I ran into him when I was like 12. And there's a video, speaking of YouTube, there's a video of me playing poorly when I'm 12 in a white hat. And at the time, Danny was using a super reverb and a Vibrolux reverb, and they were just, and I use the word daisy chain, because that's what he said. He's like, we just daisy chain them together, like input 1 into input 2 and go, And I said this on a video over the summer, and these people were like, well, can you explain the signal path of a daisy chain? I go, yeah, input 1 into input 2 out to the guitar, right? And then pray you don't get shocked, and don't touch both amps at the same time. That's the signal chain. And he would daisy chain them, and it was big and clean, but he would also talk about how he used basements. He loved basements. And, but he liked a little bit of grind when you really either got into it or rolled the volume up. But then when you rolled the volume down, it was clean and clear, because you were playing everything from like straight blues to Les Paul stuff. So he needed to switch gears quickly. And so, that's when it all became on my radar. I had many conversations like, you should check out a Pro. You should check out a twin. You should check out a high power twin. I'm like, what's a high power? Well, there was a low, a high power, and there was actually 4 variants of the twin. It was 53, 54, then 55, 56 with 2 rectifier tubes. I think the early ones were 2 rectifier tubes. And then there was the 80-watt one. So and then I bought a book on Fender amps, and I just went down this rabbit hole, and I just loved them. I've always loved Fender amps. And then I started to realize that like the Marshalls that I really liked were kind of variants on Tweed Basemans and, high power twins. Basically, a Super Lead 100 was basically a British spec version without a rectifier tube of a high power twin. So then you're going, oh, okay, I get it. Dynamics. The amps that I really loved have dynamics, where I'm in complete control of how much it's going to do and how loud it's going to be and how clean it's going to be and how distorted it's going to be. There's no extra variant. It wasn't too much gain. I noticed right away that too much gain would shut me down, and too much compression would just shut me down as a player, because I have no legato. I pick everything. I'm an Al Di Meola guy,
Yeah. Right.
It's Italians stick together.
So tell me about when you switched from the old rig, because I saw you in Atlanta. This is the Cobb Performance Center. This must have been 2013, maybe. And I think at that time you still had the old rig.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then on the Blues Cruise, I guess in 2017, that would have been, you had the whole Tweed rig at that point, right? Right. And then now you're doing 2 high-powered twins, your signature Fenders, and then the 2 Dumbles. You still doing that? Yeah. So when did you switch to the Tweeds, and why did you switch to the Tweeds from the old rig?
So the old rig was really, it was I called it the Anchor Jubilee, which at the time I had a delay, a Leslie pedal, and a few effects going. And I would run it through the effects loop because it was the Jubilee had a great effects loop. It was really one-to-one. It wouldn't, and they were cleaner. And then when I would use with the EVs, it was even cleaner than that. So they're really tight. And then I would cut it with either a super lead or 2 Van Wielden heads, which was basically a Dumble style amp, 100 watts. And that was basically the Fender. So I really liked the combination Marshall Fender. And then in 2014, we booked this gig at Red Rocks, and we were going to do a tribute to Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters. And me being a crazy nut, thinking of what it would look like in the stage setup, I'm like, so I sourced 3 white twins. I thought that'd be the coolest thing, because Kim Wilson used to use white twins on stage with the Thunderbirds. I'm like, this is so cool. Let me get in on this. So I bought 3. Didn't plug them in. I just bought them, found them, bought them. Come to plug them in, I'm like, whoa, this is no. That wasn't going to work. So a friend of mine sold me one of his high-powered Tweed twins, and then I found one in England, and then I bought a couple of Bassemans. And I wanted to do the blues gig the right way. I didn't want to just play Howlin' Wolf, Muddy Waters songs with Marshalls and stuff like that, and not have it. And I even went down the rabbit hole, on this song, Muddy played a Taylor with a maple neck. On this song, Howlin' Wolf had an Olympic white strat. On this, it's anorak collector stuff. And I remember being at Third Encore Studios in North Hollywood, and we set it all up on a Sunday, and it was buzzy, and we figured out a way to get all 4 of them running without electrocuting ourselves in phase. And I brought a Les Paul, a Strat, a Tele, and a 335. And I was like, holy crap, why haven't I done this before? Because it was the way that those amps worked, they were optimizing everything. It was the Les Paul sound that I heard in my head. It was the 335 sound, and it would sound different. Like the Les Paul would sound different than the 335, which with the old rig, a humbucker sound like a humbucker, a single coil sound like a single coil. That was it. I was like, and then the big Strat thing came out. I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I never looked back. And there are times I still use 4 twins, and there's times I'll put the Dumbles in. It just depends on over the last 8 or 9 years. The music has kind of changed a little bit, so I require a little bit more gain, so I'll throw the Dumble thing in there. And then if I'm playing like a straight blues set, I'll just use the twins because it's a little cleaner, but they shake the ground, right? And it's this high headroom optimization of whatever the guitar is doing. And if I go, man, I got some nice vintage guitars, I'd really like to hear the way they're supposed to sound. And that's why I switched, and that's why I never looked back. And I know some people prefer the old way I sounded with the more higher gain and stuff like that. But I've actually hooked up the old rig a few times since then. And I'm like, whoa, this was a lot of gain, and this was a lot to harness. And it was squishier than I remember. I'm like, wow, I used to use a lot more compression. And it's cool. I don't rule it out going back to it, but it would have to, the music would have to dictate that.
Sure. So let's talk about the actual tone for a second, and specifically the mid-range. So when I found Tweed amps, a Tweed Deluxe, it was about 2 years ago. I built a 5E3 clone from Mojo Tone. Great little amp. And I built it, and then that was my main touring rig for a year. I used it in small clubs and big arena shows and everything, because to me, the mid-range, especially of a Tweed Deluxe, it sits perfectly where the guitar needs to live in the context of a mix of a full band. Not just sitting in your bedroom and playing, but when you're in a band, backing up a singer with a keys player, another guitar player. There's something about the mid-range of a Tweed that I think works incredibly well. I also think they're incredibly versatile amps. They can cover a ton of ground. And I've heard you refer to the term mid-stacking. So what's all that about?
Okay, so one of the best things you could ever do is go to a pawn shop. There's always some used PA gear, okay? And go to a pawn shop or an old music store and go to the old rack gear section. They're happy to sell it to you, cheap. Buy yourself a DOD, a Uri, whatever. Don't have to spend a lot of money. Buy yourself a 31 band EQ. Hook it up, and all you got to do is just push frequencies up and down to understand what they do. And it's the same thing when a singer can't hear themselves sing in a club situation. Like the monitors are too sizzly or they're too woofy. Well, like what's the sizzle? What's the woof? And the thing is, if you want to hear yourself sing in a wedge, you take off the top and you take off the bottom, and you kind of make it all in the middle. Same thing with an amp. Now, if your amp is sounding a bit thin or not punchy enough, all you need to look no further than going right to the 500 hertz, 600 hertz, and notching them up a little bit. That's the weight. Everybody goes, oh, you know, like this intangible thing. It's like when you feel it on the strings, there's this weight of a tone. That's the weight. So in concept of mid-stacking, so in my current rig, when I used to be a guitar player on the road, optimal word, the Twins do a thing. So they're the jet engines. They're doing the highs, the lows, as low as I get. I don't get too low, because then why do I need a bass player? You know, and they're doing the highest frequency that my sound will generate. They're doing a lot of that heavy lifting. They're also cleaner. Now, if I was using Bassmans are a little bit, you know, they're a little bit more focused, a little gnarlier, a little in some cases not as tight. But you can also EQ those things to where it fills in the gap of the Twin. Same thing with the Dumble. The Dumble really does it well because, or any Dumble style amp, because they're really narrow focus, and a lot of people play it through Dumbles like, wow, you paid all that money for man, it just sounds really dark and, you know, not full range. I'm like, well, that's going to help you when you stack it with something else. It's also going to help you on stage when you go, man, this 50 watt just cut through everything, including horns, because it's voiced the right way. And a lot of your favorite guitar sounds, if you soloed them on record or live, they're not as full range as you think. They're pretty narrow, you know, like even like some of Paul Kossoff's tones. It's the combination of the guitar and the bass that was also distorted, making this full power chord. So the more you can experiment with mid-stacking and understanding that maybe not one amp is going to do everything for you, and you can use that in the context of a pedal. You could use the pedal to create the mid-range and the amp that you're not hearing from the actual amp. Right. So there's a lot you could do with that concept, you know, because and it's all about achieving the sound you hear in your head. Right. And it's all different. It's all subjective.
So that leads on to my last question then. And I always like to wrap these videos up with kind of some information about how players at home can go about achieving these sounds kind of on their own. Like, how can you sound like a Dumble without spending six figures, or, you know, kind of approximate it. So with that in mind, let's say someone has a deluxe reverb reissue and a couple of pedals, maybe an EQ. How would you recommend somebody go about kind of cloning the Tweed sound through their home rig?
Okay, so first of all, if you have a deluxe reverb or any sort of like a blackface amp, they're very scooped in the mids. That's why they get that nice chimey clean sound. The mids are scooped. Where basically the Tweed amp is the mirror image. They go like this, not like that. And you have to be able to identify what you like about a certain Tweed amp sound, and most importantly, use your hands. And if you like Neil Young's like super blown up deluxe sound, turn the reverb off. Okay, turn the treble down on a Blackface. We're talking about a Blackface deluxe. Turn the treble down about 4 or 5. Turn the bass up and turn the amp all the way up. The thing will start kind of collapsing. If you really want to get into it, then stick like a clean boost on it and really, go after that. But it's also, if you want like Rocky Mountain Way, those kind of like Joe Walsh things, clearly it sounds like a Bandmaster or Champ or something like that. Then you just got to be able to go in there and carve out those frequencies that you like, either with a pedal or an EQ, and the choice of guitar. It's like, it's the same argument people have about Dumbles. They're like, well, it doesn't sound like a Dumble. Well, what Dumble? And well, I don't sound like Robin Ford. I go, I've seen Robin Ford play a million times. I've seen him play with the blonde Dumble that everybody goes, oh my God, it's the best one ever. And I've seen him play with 2 rented Supers and a pedal. And guess who he sounded like? Robin Ford. It's here. And you realize he's got a light touch. So if you like sit there and you go, oh, if you just back off the intensity on the right hand, you go, oh, okay. It starts to bloom differently. His toolkit is just there to accentuate the strengths of his playing. And that's the most important thing to realize, is that your greatest asset in your tone and the greatest tool you have in your entire arsenal or collection are these. That will get you to where you need to be.
100%.
I've seen it 100 times where you go, I cannot believe that tone is coming out of that ramshackle set of gear. And then you can plug the same person into all the best stuff in the world, and it's the same tone. You just manifest it. So
my example of that that I
always bring up is Jack Pearson. I've seen Jack play so many times, and every time I've seen him play, it's with his Squier Strat through a backline twin with a tube screamer, and he has some of the best guitar tone I've ever heard.
Because he just knows what he wants to hear, and he just fiddles with the knobs until he hears it.
Yeah.
My best Jack Pearson, though, I gave him when he played on Reese Wine's record. He played on Reese's record. I gave him one of the first Epiphone Amoses. He just loved it, right? He loved it. And he's like, oh, man, this is like really cool. And and I go, Jack, I love you. Have it. It's all yours. And he goes, really? He's like, yeah. He goes, this would be cool. Maybe not for my swing jazz gig. I said, Jack, and I'm like, ding, 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 ding. I go, here's the price. Just send me a video of you playing jazz with the V. You know what I mean? And he did. And he sounded amazing. He sounded like Jack Pearson.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if it's a flying V, a Strat, but it just comes right out of him. It does not matter what he plays. And that's a great goal for any guitar player to have.
Right.
It's just to have your own singular voice, regardless of what you're plugging into.
Yeah, absolutely. Joe, I really appreciate your time, man. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, man. I appreciate the opportunity and the lesson and how to use it. This has been very informative for me.
So once again, massive thank you to Joe for coming on the channel and let me pick his brain about Tweed amps. Hopefully this won't be the last time we see Joe over on my YouTube channel. Subscribe here to my second channel if you haven't done so already, and be sure to check out the links in the description box down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see y'all real soon.